You're listening to the Big Cast, your source for the latest in financial technology. Brought to you weekly by the Best Innovation Group, with your hosts, John Best and Glenn Sarvati.
Welcome to another edition of the Big Cast. My name is Glenn Sarvati on behalf of the Best Innovation Group, where we like to do cool things with financial technology. And today we've got a conversation with Andrew Warren of the Financial Health Network, and he's the lead author of their recent Financial Health Pulse Trends Report. It's got some really good data in it, kind of confirms some things that we probably already knew, and it's good to see actual statistical confirmation of it. It probably throws a wrench into a couple of conventional wisdom things and adds in a few more data points that we probably hadn't even thought about. It's a great report, and I enjoyed digging into it, and I hope you'll enjoy hearing the conversation about that with Andrew in just a minute. Want to remind you can always find out more about the Best Innovation Group by checking out our website, big-fintech.com. And as we often remind you, we have another one of our town halls, CU Digital Town Halls, on the books. Mark your calendar. Wednesday, November 19th, the week before Thanksgiving. That will be on a Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific. You may know the drill by now. It is a live interactive conversation that we host via Zoom. It is free to join, but you do need to register in advance. If you go to cutownhall.com, you will find a place to request an invitation, and we'd be happy to have you there. But we ask you to bring your thinking caps and be ready to either unmute your microphone or use the chat function, because it's not intended to be a one-way conversation. It's supposed to be an open interchange between, no pun intended on the interchange, between the leaders in the credit union industry, talking about the most important issues that are facing the business these days. So mark your calendars, November 19th. Hope to see you there. One of the things we often talk about there is our bingo card and what all the different items that we talked in the early part of the year that we predicted either seriously or not as seriously might be happening over the course of 2025. We've got another chip that we can put down. Another one of our items came to fruition this week. FedNow, the real-time payment solution offered by Federal Reserve Financial Services, reported their Q3 results. One of the items that we put out there as a potential item that would happen during 2025 is that the volume on the still relatively early stage FedNow network would triple versus 2024. Well, we're only 9 months into the year, and that's already happened. I think they're going to be, obviously, they're going to be well over quadrupling, maybe even into the 5x level by the end of the year, but we can check off the tripling box. And that came out, we just finished Q3, September 30th, and the three big faster payment solutions in the US all reported their Q3 volumes. FedNow, RTP from the clearinghouse, and I always throw ACH in there in the same day ACH component within that, which is not real time, but is pretty fast and fast enough for a lot of people's purposes. I found it rather interesting that all of them, I'm always careful on how to say this because it really bothers me when people talk about it as a slowdown. It's not a slowdown because all of them are still growing at a very healthy clip by any normal standard. But compared to the really rapid growth pace that they had been setting over the course of the last several quarters, they're not growing quite as fast as they had been, which is interesting. And there's a few theories around out there that I'm still trying to sort through. You can check out those reports yourself. I'll post some links to that, and I'm giving it some more thought. We may have some writing on that at the Best Innovation Group blog sometime over the course of the next week or so. If that's the case, we will leave that link as well in our show notes. That brings up another one of the predictions that we actually spoke about a little bit on the last town hall in October, early October. And I wanted to go back and revisit it because when I'm wrong, I like to admit that I'm wrong. And went back to have a conversation with John Best on this real briefly. So check this one out as I eat some crow. So first off, John, I want to correct myself because you were right on something on the town hall the other day. And I had to look it up. And sure enough, one of our bingo card items said that NVIDIA would outperform the S&P 500. Well, everybody probably remembers it came into the year having on a very, very hot streak and then proceeded to dip, especially around the whole tariff thing and everything else. And NVIDIA stock was actually down on the year all the way through May.
Well, there were a lot of contributing factors. DeepSeek You know,
Oh, that's right. That was January too, of course.
yeah, there were rumors around that. So
then suddenly those chips weren't quite as essential as people thought they were going to be.
Right. DeepSeek was the big contributor because just for everyone listening, because it seems like 10, 50 years ago, but it just happened this year. DeepSeek came out with a model that was rating its or comparing relatively well to models that were created by OpenAI and Anthropic using billions of dollars of hardware with, using millions of dollars of hardware. And
I thought it was $4.75, but okay, whatever.
Yeah, something like that. And so the idea was, oh, wait, maybe you can accomplish the same results with far less, which means that you don't need all this big NVIDIA hardware, which devalued NVIDIA for a little bit. So that was
and keyword being for a little bit, they started to recover around May.
Right. Well, it became clear that maybe we don't know the whole story about DeepSeek.
There was also, yes, a belief
that... Was it DeepSeek or DeepMind? It's DeepSeek. DeepMind's Google's platform. Yep.
And the suspicion grew that, they probably did use those chips. They just didn't disclose they were using those chips and things like that. So the recovery began. I kind of fell asleep on it. And lo and behold, if I look at the stock price right now, and it's kind of now back into a level of stability, but the S&P is up for the year, like around 14%.
Well, NVIDIA, right. And it was a series of things. It was the Intel acquisition, because that gave them a way to make more chips onshore. Presumably they'll retool some of that, because that was the problem, was that we don't want to sell China, our global competitors, the specialized chips that were developed here in the United States. So there's a limit on that. I think it's an ITAR limit or something along those lines. And so, but the problem is it's funny to say, we're not going to sell them to you, but we're going to outsource the manufacturing of them to you. It's like, it's hard to
don't let any go out the back door. Right.
Yeah. It's hard to reconcile those two things. And keep in mind that I don't know if everyone knows this, but China is a giant, China's internet is almost like if it was how when you're at work and you can't get to certain things and it's a lockdown environment, and rightly so, because you're at work, you're on your work computer, you don't want bad guys. China is like a giant company when it comes to the internet, for its citizens.
The walled garden.
It's completely walled off, so they control the in and out in that. And so if you're manufacturing over there, you have to VPN out, because you have to use their network to get back out to your resources and other shore resources. So anyways, long story short, NVIDIA is back, and I knew the only reason I said that the other day is, me, I'm just sort of I'm listening to everything, and I picked it up on a call. It might have been, what I do every day where I catch a lot of stuff is I still get up every day, and the first thing I do is say, I don't want to say it out loud, I'll say, hey, GOGGLE, or GOOGLE, because it'll respond, and I'll say, play the news or play the tech news, and it just plays the news while I brush my teeth and get ready. And that's where I catch on some of this stuff. So if anybody else is listening, it's a good way to catch up. The Reuters has a good technology section.
Well, as you and I kind of mentioned or joked beforehand, so right now the bingo card looks like we're about to play that chip or put that chip down. However, in this world, we didn't say when. I mean, that's kind of implicit, and outperform for the year 2025, because that was what the prediction was.
Yeah, so we won't know that till
December. We're one tweet away.
Yeah,
who knows? One tweet away, and we could suddenly have the curve invert yet again. So we haven't officially put that chip on the board, but as we said, we're only one tweet away. You never know what's going to happen, but at this juncture, it appears that NVIDIA, after having an absolute gangbusters year in 2024, and I'd have to go back and look, I think they were very easily outperforming the market for a couple of years before that. It looks like they are safely on their way to outperforming the S&P 500 again this year. As I said, our main attraction today, the Financial Health Network. Andrew Warren, who is the author of their Pulse Barometer. As you'll be hearing, I've been following this one for some time, and they've got all kinds of really good stuff. The report has continued to kind of evolve and get more detailed, and has a lot of great content. This is a newly minted report with some great new information. So let's just jump into my conversation with Andrew. I'm here with Andrew Warren, the lead author of the Financial Health Network's recently released Pulse Trends report, which has a ton of really interesting data. I'm a data hound, and that's why I love this kind of stuff. Andrew, thanks. I'm sure you've been on the circuit kind of spreading the gospel on this one.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks so much for having me, Glenn.
if I'm remembering correctly, I know this is the 8th year you've been doing this report. I'm pretty sure I was in the audience when you released the first one back. I think it was probably at one of your Emerge conferences back in Arizona. The great thing now is that you've got some good long time series to kind of draw conclusions, and it looks like you've actually kind of continued to refine it by doing different cuts of demographic data as well, right? That's kind of evolved over time.
Yeah, absolutely. So about 10 years ago now, the Financial Health Network expanded from a narrower focus on financial inclusion to a broader focus on financial health. And the idea there was that policymakers, financial institutions, and employers should be focused on more than just getting people access to financial products. They should really be concerning themselves with whether or not those products are improving people's financial lives overall. And when we made this shift, we realized if we're going to focus on this new holistic concept of financial health, it would be good to define that and also to propose a way to measure it. And then if we're going to measure it, then it also might be a good idea to measure it on a national level so that we can understand the state of financial health in the US and, like you mentioned, measure disparities in financial health and see how all of that is changing over time in a consistent way.
And it's a pretty significant sample. Overall, it's several thousand, right?
Yes, it's growing a little bit every year. Right now, the sample is about 8,000, which gives us more than enough sample to draw conclusions about households in the US overall, but also crucially gives us enough sample to disaggregate by race and ethnicity and household income and employment status and health status and all sorts of different things that we look at in the report.
Now, I know that the three kind of primary categories you put people into is if their financial situation is healthy, coping, or vulnerable. And we'll get into that. And obviously, the vulnerable piece is where I've kind of focused most of my attention. That's where the flashing red indicator light is. Little bit of a surprising outcome this year, I think. I don't know if you agree that was if it was what you were expecting. Not massive, but a slight improvement in terms of the way the data came out compared to 2024. And we should also probably mention the survey was conducted in the field from mid-April to mid-May of 2025, correct?
Yes, that's right.
So, and what did you think? I mean, it is statistically significant, but not a dramatic change. I mean, the numbers have been relatively stable over the course of the full period of 8 years you've been doing this, with an understandable blip of some sort during the COVID years, which could be good news or bad news. It isn't getting worse, but it also shows that we're not really making a whole lot of progress. Is that a fair kind of 50,000 foot assessment?
Yes, so that is definitely fair. As you mentioned, one of our top line findings this year is also that the percentage of households that are financially vulnerable actually decreased over the past year, which wasn't actually all that surprising to us.
Really?
We
Okay.
didn't. Yeah, I mean, we didn't expect to see big changes in financial health over this time period, which again was spring 2024 to spring 2025. And that's just because there weren't really sweeping policy changes on the scale like of what we saw during the pandemic during this year. But over this time period, inflation did cool a bit and the job market was relatively strong. And so it makes some sense to us that some people on the margins would have found it easier to save money this year, especially relative to the prior 2 years when inflation was really eating into people's budgets. So, I mean, to emphasize that point, I think your read of this year's results as good news or bad news really depends on the point of comparison that you want to use. So, as we show, there are a couple of indicators that improved a bit from last year, especially for vulnerable groups. But if you look further back, some of those indicators, like spending relative to income, so the ability to save money, and debt manageability, some of those indicators are still worse off or about the same as they were prior to the pandemic.
And I think you've mentioned also in the report that we've seen minor improvements in past years as well, and they tend to be short-lived. it seems like it kind of, things kind of pop up and down a little bit in those ranges, correct?
Yes, I think that's exactly right. I think big picture, the percentage of the population that's financially healthy hovers pretty stubbornly around 28 to 32%. And the percentage that's financially vulnerable hovers pretty stubbornly between 15 to 17%. And looking back at the 8 years of data that we have at this point, it's hard to see any sign of a long-term structural shift in financial health in this data. That said, I don't I don't want to dismiss what happened during the pandemic, because I think there are lessons for us to learn about the impact of public policy there. So, if, as you'll see in the report, um, financial health increased pretty substantially in 2020 and 2022, even though we were in the throes of a economic and public health crisis.
Because
And
because there was no
the
discretionary
increase,
no discretionary spending, right? Almost by definition, it became almost a forced savings situation as long as you didn't lose your job or had some kind of paycheck continuation.
yes, definitely the fact that we shut down parts of the economy and prevented people from spending money as they otherwise would have made a big impact and, yeah, essentially forced people to save money. But um, you know, also a large portion of that financial health increase is likely due to the fact that people were receiving a lot of extra support from the government, including cash that was sent directly to them. So I think that's another lesson to learn there. That it's I wouldn't say that financial health never changes or anything like that, but I also don't think that we should be surprised that some temporary cash support from the government and those pandemic policies, we shouldn't be surprised that they didn't improve people's financial health forever.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, one of the other things, I think there's always this kind of temptation or this tendency for people to assume that, when we talk about, okay, things may have changed from 15 to 13%, the movements are a lot more stark than that. I mean, you've got people who, between every year, there are people that fall out of the healthy category into the coping category and vice versa. So you've got, even if the overall percentages don't change, there are millions of families that move either out of the vulnerable area into the, kind of coping area and vice versa. So it's not nearly as static a picture as those percentages might make it sound.
Yeah, people's financial health is pretty dynamic. So, we've just been talking about so far these, what we call cross-sectional estimates of financial health, where we look at the percentage who are financially healthy, vulnerable, or coping each year. But what we also do with the survey is we follow households year over year. And so we can observe how their financial health goes up or goes down or stays the same. And when we look at that data, what we call the longitudinal data, we see that pretty consistently between years, around 25% of the population goes either up or down a financial health tier. So they either move from financially healthy to financially coping, or from coping to vulnerable, or vice versa. And so this is a pretty common experience for a lot of households. And we've done a little bit of research into this and found that these shifts in financial health happen when you'd expect it, when households experience events that especially decreases in their financial health. Those happen when they experience events that stress their financial health, like losing a job, or like having their car break down, or getting sick.
Makes
So
sense.
it's definitely a dynamic process.
Now, I also noticed that the improvement, I mean, this probably is somewhat intuitive. The improvement this year stems almost entirely from the lowest income consumers. I mean, in terms of, I don't know, there's, again, movement in both directions. We said there was a decline in the number of financially vulnerable, but there's financially vulnerable people even at the middle income levels when you actually break out the detail. But it seems like the improvement came from the lower income end of the spectrum. Am I reading that right?
Yes. So across the board, the biggest improvements this year mostly happened among vulnerable populations. So low income households, like you mentioned, also low wealth households, and we saw increases among renter households and Black households as well, households without investments. So pretty consistent story there.
That's it.
That said, we're very careful to note in the report that there's still a long way to go to close the financial health gaps between these more vulnerable segments of the population and more historically financially healthy segments of the population.
Yeah, another one that, again, is probably fairly, self-evident, but also I think important to document is the existence of credit card debt. Families or households that carry credit card debt versus people who do not have credit card debt. Not too surprisingly, families with credit card debt are more financially vulnerable. Now, you could argue that maybe to some extent, if you can be a transactor rather than a revolver, that would help your financial situation. That's also easy to say because it implies you have enough money to actually handle. And I think that's another statistic that shows what percentage of the households are actually spending more on a monthly basis than they take in. And I think that improves slightly as well, but it's still a pretty disturbing number. I mean, we're not even talking about savings at that point, just the actual, ins and outs, and they don't balance out.
Yeah, so that indicator of who's spending less than their income, so in other words, effectively able to save at least some money over the past year, that was one of the indicators that did improve over the past year. However, it's also one of the indicators that's still worse off than prior to the pandemic. So there's really two ways of viewing that trend, and we walk through both in the report.
And that's a number.
And to your point,
that's a number that's much higher than I would have expected. I forget. I don't have it in front of me. Do you happen to remember the percentage of households that actually spend more than they take in?
Yes, it's about half. The percentage of households who spent less than their income over the past 12 months was 49%. So in other words, the percentage who are not really saving money is around 51%.
And some of them say that's about the same, I believe. But I think the folks who are spending more than they make is still probably, I think, in like the 30% range. I'll go back and verify that, and I can add that after the fact. But that's interesting. Another totally different angle that I thought was an interesting question you asked. You have to always ask a question about artificial intelligence these days. And you mentioned that you're exploring where people get their advice, their financial advice. Still a relatively low percentage are getting it from AI, but it's growing fast.
Yes. So we asked this question last year, and this year we asked people about the sources of where they received financial advice from. And last year, 3% of the population said that they looked for financial advice from a general AI chatbot along the lines of ChatGPT and Gemini. So pretty low. And this year it was 7%. So still pretty low, but more than doubling from last year. So there's a big open question for us, how fast is this going to continue to increase? And is it going to hit a ceiling soon? Because another interesting thing that came out of our data is that only 12% of the population said that they mostly or completely trust financial advice from AI sources. So there's a really low level of trust there. And I think it remains to be seen whether people are going to gradually trust these sources more, whether they should trust these sources for financial advice. So it's a really interesting, quickly changing space.
I had missed that second piece. That's really interesting that the percentage that actually trusted is that low. The other thing, the top sources of where people get their information, friends and family, I guess that makes sense. I didn't necessarily immediately think that would be the highest one. And then tied for second, two things that I don't necessarily think of as going together. Financial professionals, kind of interesting that that's actually lower than friends and family, but not everybody has access to a professional. And social media, which may be even less reliable than AI. I'm not sure about that one.
Yeah, well, I think one way you could try to explain that is that, whether someone consults one of these sources for financial advice depends on A, how accessible it is to them, and B, how much they trust it. And people probably, people's friends and family are pretty accessible to them, and they probably trust them because they're their friends and family. So that explains, or might explain, why that's one of the highest sources. Financial professionals are probably pretty trustworthy, but like you said, not particularly accessible to a large part of the population, at least not financial advisors. And then finally, social media. I do remember off the top of my head that levels of trust in social media as a source for financial advice were pretty low as well, around the same range as AI.
Oh, really?
But
Okay,
social media
that's
is,
interesting. I
yeah, but
would have guessed it'd be a little bit higher. I guess kind of glad to hear that.
yeah, it's interesting that people are, telling us that they're skeptical of social media as a source for financial advice, but still using it at a pretty high rate. So, that tells you something about the importance of how accessible it is. Maybe, I don't know, but these are just hunches.
Yeah, exactly. This is you're reporting the data. Then we can start extrapolating and interpolating and speculating from there, I suppose. Two other things that I thought were really interesting that jumped out at me: the households with and without student loans. Um, the ones who do not have student loans actually are less financially vulnerable, which is another one of those kind of interesting double-edged swords. It doesn't say if the people with student loans actually had achieved a degree. Did you do any research on who actually has college degrees? I'm kind of curious. Part of me, my hypothesis might be that the folks who took student loans and then didn't manage to achieve the goal of getting a degree would probably be the ones in the worst situation.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. We have not looked at that directly. We have not split out those estimates by whether or not those people had completed a degree and at what level. Although we could, and that would be really interesting to look at. I think your hunch is in the right direction. I am fairly certain there's other research out there that shows that a surprisingly high number of people with student debt have only partially completed college degrees, and that those people tend to struggle more with that student debt, as you'd expect.
Would
That's
make
not
sense.
research we've done, but that's research that I remember floating out there. So yeah, I think your hunch is well placed there.
And then on the flip side, there are also the folks without student debt either didn't ever go to college, which would be one category, or were either they've paid it off or were fortunate enough never to have to incur debt in the process. And I'm guessing that those are probably a couple of pretty distinct cohorts as well. Just something, food for thought for next time around.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, yeah, the population with student debt includes both some very financially healthy people and some very financially vulnerable people, and same for people without student debt for the reasons that you mentioned.
Probably the one that surprised me the most of everything is people born households of, I assume it's head of household, born outside the US versus born in the US. I bet if you polled people in general, they would not guess that the ones born outside the US actually are less likely to be financially vulnerable. Did that surprise you?
It did at first surprise me, especially because I'm it's not an area of expertise of mine. But I think that this result really just points to how diverse the immigrant population in the United States is. We wrote a brief about this actually last year, maybe a year and a half ago or so, where we looked at foreign versus native born populations and their financial health, both overall, but then also split out by race and ethnicity. And when we did this, we saw that the patterns were reversed in some cases, depending on racial and ethnic identity. So white people who were foreign born were actually more financially healthy than white people who were born in the US, whereas foreign born Latino people were less likely to be financially healthy than native born Latino people. So there's likely very wide variation in financial health depending on where you're immigrating from, why you're immigrating, and the kind of experience that you have once you're here.
And I was thinking of the experience you bring with you, which also comes with why you came. But I was thinking about just in terms of debt culture, that some cultures are not, fond of taking on debt. And I know that's one of your equations in terms of financial vulnerability, that the higher the debt load is certainly not going to help you on that metric. So I would think maybe that comes into play, but I think your points are even better as far as logical descriptors. Interesting.
Could be. Yeah, I think that's an interesting hypothesis too.
Well, and there's much more in the report on this. I mean, I think it goes about 75 pages, if I'm not mistaken. We'll post a link to that in our show notes so people can follow up. And if they have follow-up questions, is there an inbox to send things to, or how do you try to get the information and the dialogue going on all this?
Yes, there definitely is. You're welcome to share my email address directly. We also have an email address, I believe is pulse@finhealthnetwork.org that you could share. Yeah, please do read the report. There's both a nice, short, pretty executive summary on our website if you want to just skim the high-level results. But then there's also I think 100+ page PDF if you want to really dive deep.
And I'm usually a word person, but they're the graphics that actually show the breakout, especially the changes between 24 and 25 by each of these individual categories. I spent a good bit of time in the 100-page report. Good stuff. Andrew Warren, the lead author of the new Financial Health Network Pulse Trends Report. Thanks for taking the time. This has only been out. I mean, I guess, like you say, it's pretty rapid turnaround too. I mean, this data is it's just about less than 6 months old, right?
Yeah, we try our best to get it out as soon as possible and to stay timely in the national conversation. Things are changing fast, but I like to think our numbers will still be relevant for at least a few more months.
Yeah, and we'll be watching for the next cycle because I can already see a few things I can't wait to see. I mean, we know that the job market's starting to turn a little bit, so it'll be interesting to see exactly how that factors into the numbers next year. Watch this space. Andrew, thanks for taking the time.
Thanks so much for having me.
Another little minor tidbit that I'll mention, if you want to really get into advanced planning of your calendar, discovered that the next Financial Health Network Emerge Conference, their annual event, is going to be taking place in my hometown of Atlanta, Georgia in 2026. May 19th through the 21st are the dates of that. Mark your calendar if you are so inclined. I'm sure you'll be hearing more about that in the not too distant future. But great stuff coming out of their shop, and we'll be following up between now and then as well. Speaking of conferences, and this is the heart of conference season, next week, by the time we put out our next episode, I will be on the ground at Money 2020 in Las Vegas, which is taking place from October 26th through 29th. In my preparation, going through the attendee list, there's a lot of credit unions that seem to be attending this year. In part, I'm sure because of the partnership that was struck with the Mitchell Stankovic Associates and the Credit Union Underground, the pre-event that they're holding on Saturday the 25th. We talked about that last week, and we can post a link to that one as well. If you happen to be going to Money 2020, please do look me up on the app, Glenn Sarvati, once again, or you can find me on LinkedIn, as I always say. And would love to track you down and have a conversation while we're out there. The very next week after that, Venture Tech in Frisco, Texas, just outside of Dallas, November 3rd through 5th. Always good times there, and always a lot of interesting new companies that get on stage to pitch both the early stage and the somewhat more advanced staged QSO, and not necessarily yet QSO, but fintech startups looking to partner and work with credit unions. I have learned through the grapevine, through my contacts there, the venture tech people have made it a mission of theirs to try to gain more involvement of smaller credit unions in the space. And toward that end, they have made some scholarships available for smaller credit unions, which they're defining as under $250 million of assets, to attend for free. Well, they have to pay your own expenses, but they're waiving the registration fee for those smaller credit unions. And I'm told there are still a couple of those available. It's getting tight on time at this point. But if you happen to be interested, keep that in mind. Check out the website, myventuretech.com. We'll post a link. And if you are qualified, if you're a small credit union and this sounds like something you'd like to get involved in, and I suggest you do, because it's great stuff, great conversation. And again, if you happen to be going down there, please do say hi. Drop us a note. You can probably reach out to Venture Tech directly to get the details, but I can steer you in the right direction as well if that's necessary. And then we'll have lots of content coming up from both of those shows in interviews I do on site at both places. But then not long after that, we're coming down to just about a month away from our annual Thanksgiving episode, where we talk about the things we've been thankful for in the fintech, credit union, banking, financial services world overall. it's been a crazy year. It should be interesting to see what our group of four usually have some really sometimes unexpected things to say, and we'll be doing that again. They'll be posting on Thanksgiving week. If you've got any thoughts of things you've been thankful for over the year, we always love to hear from you. Drop a line. Please get in touch. As I said, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. You can always find us at the Best Innovation Group website, big-fintech.com, where you'll find more details about all the offerings that the Best Innovation Group has for you. Our Grand Poobah John Best can be found on LinkedIn as well, and as John Best. You can also find us at Big FinTech or at JB FinTech. We're also active on Blue Sky. Track us down there. Drop us a note however you choose to. And if you go to the media tab on the website, you'll always find all of our past episodes. You'll also find us on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon, etc. As I said, more new content next week. I won't be at home to do it, but I've already had an interesting couple of conversations that we'll get together that you can enjoy, maybe even from Las Vegas if you're sitting out at Money 2020 or a couple of other conferences that I happen to know are going on right now. But wherever you happen to be, as always, we really appreciate you taking the time to listen. Have a good week.
Check back each week for the latest from the Big Cast. Or better yet, we hope you'll consider subscribing for free via Spotify, Stitcher, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you have questions or comments, we'd love to hear from you. Tweet us at Big FinTech. Email info@big-fintech.com. Or visit us at big-fintech.com and click on the Media tab, where you can post a comment or check out our archive of hundreds of past episodes. See you next week.